I mentioned that life has taken for all of us this giant detour. I don't know, does it feel like a detour to you? It sure does, yeah. Well, that's the way it feels to me, obviously, or I wouldn't have used that word. I shift into low gear, maybe, or something. Yeah, some kind of gear. I wrote in the back of the bulletin, this new normal. I don't know. I'm going to be curious what the new normal is. I don't know what new normal will be. I mentioned some of the things that are floating through my head in the back of the bulletin. I do, however, have a very real confidence that as a church and just as individuals, if we follow Jesus, we'll be okay. That it doesn't really matter too much where the new normal takes us. Or, maybe we'll go back to like it was. I don't know. It doesn't matter too much how life ends up to be different from this point on, because Jesus will walk with us. And He's not going to leave us. He's not going to say, well, I was with you back there in February of 2020, but now things are so weird, you're on your own. That is not how it works. In fact, Jesus actually knows where it's going. It's not going to take him by surprise. He's not going to wake up one day and say, I'm so surprised at where things are right now. That just isn't going to happen. And so we have a real reason, a very real reason, every day, wake up reason, to not worry. We really do. We have a real reason not to worry. Okay, so that's the detour that I've been thinking about. And as I think about that detour, I thought about our church and the fact that last October, I led us, I decided, and I don't think it was anything that anybody felt like was a bad decision, to really focus on Romans chapter 12 for this whole church year. If you're familiar with our church, you know that our church year begins in October, and so I preached through verses in Romans 12 in the fall, and then we went into holiday time, and so we did some different things, and we went back and looked at Romans 12 early this year, and then the detour happened, and so I feel like it would be good for us to recalibrate ourselves with Romans 12, okay? Sort of hear it again. Quite frankly, I remember some of the sermons I preached just a few months ago, because life has been so different. And so I thought to myself, well, just read Romans 12. And so I've been reading it this week. And as I've read Romans 12 this week, I feel like I have a better picture of the whole. And so I want to share with you the picture that I see of the whole of Romans 12. And then as a church, we're going to walk back into those verses and trust that God will use them to help us stay on track with Him. Okay? So that's where I'm going with this, not just right now, but in the weeks ahead. I'm not exactly sure what that will mean on Sunday services. Don't have it all planned out. You know me. Many of you know me well enough to know that's not the kind of preacher that I am. I read Romans 12. I've talked about the detour. We've prayed and asked God to use His Word. So let me divide Romans 12 into three pieces, okay? The first piece is verses 1 and 2. And in fact, I went ahead and reprinted verses 1 and 2 in the bulletin. So if you're on the worship page there in the bulletin, verses, Romans 12, 1 and 2 are at the bottom of the page there. And those are verses, boy, I memorized those a long time ago, and I still find them to be so, so valuable. Romans 12, 1 and 2. I urge you, therefore, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable, holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual worship. And do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve of God's will. You'll know what God's will is. Romans 12 starts out, and its finger is pointed at each one of us individually. Each one of us individually. As a church, what we do starts with each of us individually. It's really not a group effort. It's an individual responsibility. We join together, and we do share together, and we find strength with each other. But as we stand before God, all of us carry those verses as our job. Right worship and godly thinking. Right worship and godly thinking. Right worship. What have we got to offer? Maybe you offer your bank account, maybe your car, your house. You know what God really wants? He wants me. He wants you. As individuals, he says, offer me your life. Would you be a living sacrifice? The verse says, that is the kind of worship that pleases God. Singing is nice. Being outside is fun. Beautiful buildings are great. What God wants is us. He wants me to be a living sacrifice. And that is right worship. It starts there. As a church, we will go nowhere if individuals in our church are not willing to offer ourselves to God as a living sacrifice. We just won't go where. It doesn't matter whether we have the best pastor or the worst pastor. It doesn't matter if our building is beautiful or not. It doesn't matter what our budget is. It doesn't matter anything. If we as individuals are not willing to say, Lord, I am yours. I put my life in your hands. Paul said that's the kind of worship that God wants. Right thinking, godly thinking. Right worship and godly thinking. The next step then is to begin to think like God wants us to think, to renew our minds, to let His Word adjust how we think and what we do. We offer ourselves to Him, and then we say, okay, Lord, now I want to learn to think like you tell me to think. That's where it starts. As I think about starting there, I realize that if we don't start there, we will never go anywhere as a church. If we don't start there, we'll never get anywhere. Each of us is an individual missionary, individual minister, individual servant. And God says, that's where I want you to start. Offer yourselves to me a living sacrifice and learn to think like I tell you to think. And now we're on the right track if we start there. I was thinking about that, and I realized, how is it that we blow it? Where does that break down when we try to do it? And one of the places that we blow it is we think to ourselves, well, you know, the church is about leaders and about programs and about Sunday school or Bible studies or activities, if we start to think like that, we will decide, this living sacrifice stuff, that's too hard. I'm just going to go to Sunday school. That's good enough. If we start to think like that, we'll think, well, our church, we just really aren't doing enough. We need to do some more programs. What kind of programs would be good to reach out with? You see, if we're not willing to say, Lord, I put my life in your hands, and I decide right now I want to think like you tell me to think. If we don't start there, we will never, ever let go of the other stuff that keeps us from serving Him. That's how we blow it. And also we blow it because we think, that doesn't amount to very much. You think to yourself, well, I share my faith at work, but it doesn't really matter. Nobody listens. Or I try to pray with my kids before they go to bed at night, but it's like a zoo in our house, and it just doesn't seem like it makes much difference. If we don't start there, then we don't realize how valuable the pieces that we do are to God's work. God wants to use each one of us. And it's not about how famous we are, or how many people see what we do, or how many pats on the back we get. It's about offering ourselves to God as a living sacrifice. And then saying, okay, Lord, I want to start thinking like you tell me to think about life. I want my mind to be renewed. If we will start there, then each of us becomes extremely valuable in God's work. And we will quit putting it off on somebody else to do the work of the church. Because that work belongs to every one of us. Everyone. Okay. First two verses, first piece of Romans 12. We have an individual challenge. We are challenged to right worship and godly thinking. Then he moves into some verses that are interesting. Maybe as I read them, I don't know, how did they strike you? I'd be curious. Sometimes when we read the Bible or somebody's reading it for us, we listen pretty good for a while and then we sort of drift away. These next verses, verses 3 through 8, talk about the value, the importance of spiritual gifts. You might say, well, why does he get into that? I mean, he's just challenged us, and now he says, okay, let me tell you how to think about this work I'm calling you to. This living sacrifice, this godly thinking. Here's how I want you to think about it. I want you to realize that I have given you some special gifts to use in my kingdom work. He names some of them. I don't think he tries to be exhaustive. I think he would say there's a lot of those gifts out there. I think what Paul is saying is, let's pay attention. Did you notice? He said, now I want you to think about yourself with sober judgment. I want you to think about yourself accurately. Don't pretend. Don't play a game with yourself. Be honest. See how God has gifted you. And use that gift or those gifts. Use them. I don't know. When you hear that, what do you think? Do you think, hot dog, I'm so glad God's gifted me. Let's find out what it is. Let's use it. Or do you think, me? Maybe Pastor Dude's gifted, Katie and Cindy and Scott and Milton. Look at the gifts they have. But me, I don't have any gifts. Hey, if you've thought like that, you have just slapped God in the face. Now, I know you didn't mean to, but you did. because he has placed you in his body, and every individual in the body of his church, every member has a job to do. Every member is important. Every single one. Every single one. How you doing with the gifts that God's given you? It is hard. Yeah, it's hard to think about gifts. We're so caught up in earning money and paying the bills and, maybe going to I was going to say going to a movie, but we don't even do that anymore, do we? We get in our recreation, summer, we are so caught up in so many things. I get that. But these verses say, when you've offered yourself to God, and as you start thinking like he wants you to think, I want you to be sober. I want you to pay close attention. God has gifted you, and he wants you to use your gifts. As he talks about those gifts, he says, we are not the same. He says, we're not supposed to look around and say, well, his gift is better than my gift, so, I don't count. Don't do that. We need each other. If we don't do what God has gifted us to do, the whole church suffers. The whole church. I suffer. You suffer if someone decides their gift isn't important and they don't want to use it and it doesn't matter and they just give up. Don't give up. How do we blow it? What goes on in our head, and when we start thinking like this, it just drives us away from following what God says. When we think, I don't have anything to offer, I'm not good enough. Or we think, this is a waste of time. I think about, last week was Father's Day, and I was thinking about fathers and doing stuff as a dad and how it's hard. And it's so easy to think, it just doesn't, it's just a waste of time. My daily devotion time, I don't focus very well and I'm not getting anything out of it. It's just a waste of time. I give up. Don't give up. It's not a waste of time. When we do what God wants us to do, he is at work in our lives and he uses us. Don't give up. And don't compare and don't judge. Don't look at somebody and say, they're doing it all wrong. Don't do that. Instead, say, Lord, what do you want me to do? What should I be doing in your work? What is my gifts? What kind of ministry do you call me to? How do you want to use me and the people that you've put me with? Don't worry about somebody else. You focus on what God is calling you to do, and you're going to be okay. Don't compare and don't judge. Use your gifts. God will work. Use your gifts. First two verses, Romans 12. The individual challenge. It all starts there. Offer your body, offer yourself as a sacrifice, alive to God, and then start to think with godly thinking, like God wants you to think. Piece number 2 in Romans 12. Think about your gifts and use them. See how God wants to use you in his work, his kingdom work. He's gifted you with an important place in his kingdom work. Get involved in what he's doing. We're going to take a break and sing a song. It's a new song, and if you tuned in to the virtual service, we played it there, and Katie and the musicians are going to sing it. The words are in the bulletin. Forever Jesus.